Rain slicked the New York City sidewalks as Grace Porter pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders. The cuffs were fraying, the zipper long broken, but it was all she had. She didn't mind. Grace had grown used to slipping through life unnoticed, blending into the background like part of the city's forgotten architecture. Her job at Benson Enterprises paid just enough to keep her in a shared apartment in Queens, and she quietly did her work, never drawing attention. That morning, Grace had passed up breakfast to save the $3.50 for her subway ride. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she shook it off. Her shift as a file clerk was routine, scanning documents, entering data, delivering envelopes with eyes cast down. No one really knew her name. That suited her fine. But the course of her life began to change when she heard crying echo from the hallway near the loading docks. Everyone else seemed to pass by, too busy or too indifferent. Grace, despite knowing she was already behind on her schedule, followed the sound. Tucked behind a stack of crates, she found a baby, no older than 6 months, wrapped in a tattered blanket. Next to the baby was a small diaper bag and a crumpled note. Her name is Hope. Please forgive me. Grace's first instinct was to run for help. But the baby looked up at her, wide-eyed and trembling, and something in Grace's chest pulled taut. She lifted the infant gently and cradled her close, whispering soft words of comfort. She stayed with the baby until security arrived and took over. Grace provided her name to the responding officer and, without fanfare, walked back to her desk. She didn't know that she had just planted a seed that would grow into something far beyond anything she imagined. The CEO of Benson Enterprises, Julian West, was not accustomed to surprises. Billionaire by 35, cold by reputation, and brilliant by every measurable standard, he managed his empire with sharp precision. When his assistant informed him of the abandoned baby found on company grounds, he barely glanced up. "Handled?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied. "But there's an odd detail. When CPS processed the infant, they found an emergency contact listed Grace Porter. She works here." Julian blinked. "She what?" "Emergency contact. On the baby's documents." He leaned back in his chair. "Find her." Grace was startled when security asked her to accompany them upstairs. She had never been above the 10th floor, let alone summoned to the executive suite. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her worn tote bag. Julian West studied her as she stepped into his office. She was plain, forgettable in appearance, but something in her eyes, a mix of resilience and kindness, caught him off guard. "Miss Porter, why was your name listed as an emergency contact for the baby?" She swallowed. "I don't know. I've never met the mother. I just found the baby by the loading dock. But your name?" "I volunteer on weekends," Grace said quietly. "At a shelter in the Bronx. Maybe the mother saw me there. I help out when I can." Julian was silent. He had been to charity galas, thrown 6-figure donations at causes, but he'd never met someone like her, someone who did good without expecting credit. CPS couldn't find any relatives. The baby was placed in a foster system already burdened. Grace couldn't sleep that night, her thoughts wrapped around Tiny Hope's trembling fingers. A week later, Julian called again. "Would you consider fostering the child?" Grace blinked. "Me. She knows you. You're her only link. I can't afford. I'll cover all expenses." "Why would you do that?" Julian looked at her, the edges of his cold exterior cracking. "Because I think you're the first genuinely good person I've met in years." Grace agreed. It wasn't easy. Her life turned upside down overnight. Diapers, formula, sleepless nights. But she loved Hope fiercely, as if she'd always been hers. And Julian kept his word, providing support quietly, anonymously. Over time, he started to visit. At first under the guise of business, checking in, making sure Grace had everything. Then, just because, he brought books for Hope, grocery gift cards, toys. Grace, cautious at first, began to open up. She learned about his childhood, lonely, raised by nannies in echoing halls. He learned about her dreams, once wanting to be a teacher, then life getting in the way. One snowy December evening, Julian watched Grace rock Hope by the window, singing softly. Something shifted in him. The cold armor he had built around his heart melted slightly. "You've changed me," he whispered. Grace looked up, startled. "I didn't mean to." "I know. That's what makes it real." Months passed. Hope's case remained unresolved. But Grace, with Julian's help, formally filed for guardianship. She wrote a heartfelt letter to the court, explaining her desire to give Hope the life she deserved. The judge asked, "Why do you believe you're the best choice for this child?" Grace stood, hands clasped. "Because I won't walk away. I didn't when I first saw her, and I never will. The judge ruled in her favor. At the courthouse steps, Julian waited, a bouquet of yellow tulips in hand. You did it, he said. We did it, she corrected, smiling. Hope clapped in her stroller. Julian took Grace's hand. Have dinner with me tonight? She laughed, tears in her eyes. Is this a date or a board meeting? Whichever gets me more time with you. They walked down the courthouse steps together, a new family forming, not by blood, but by choice, love, and the quiet power of kindness. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures that changed everything. It was the moment Grace chose to stop, to care. And the moment a CEO looked past the surface and saw the heart behind the silence. Because sometimes, the smallest act of compassion can echo louder than a lifetime of ambition. And sometimes, love doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly, carries a baby, and changes everything.